In the winter of 1873, a girl named Emma Richter sat at her kitchen window and watched death happen before it arrived. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She calculated it. 11 years old, face like porcelain, eyes like ash-colored glass. She knew things she shouldn't, not guesses, equations. She'd calculate the exact time a man would collapse in a brewery 2 blocks away. Name the hour a scandal would explode inside a marriage. And worse, predict it with such cold precision, people started to whisper one word: demon. But it wasn't witchcraft. Not quite. Because Emma left behind something far more dangerous than spells or hexes, she left a book. A leather-bound journal filled with columns of numbers no one could decode. Those who tried didn't remain the same. You see, this isn't a ghost story. This is a story of observation, of patterns, of what happens when a child's mind is wired not for fantasy, but for truth. The kind of truth even God stays silent about. She could see corruption in step counts, adultery in laundry lines. She watched long enough, and everything revealed itself. Emma didn't need faith. She had math, and in 1873 Milwaukee, math became a weapon. You ready for the rest? By the time she was 6, Emma could memorize entire conversations after hearing them once. By 8, she could count the precise number of seconds it took the brewery bell to ring, down to the breath between each toll. And by 11, she no longer smiled. Milwaukee's German Quarter was a maze of rituals: morning walks, precise meal times, predictable arguments behind shuttered windows. Emma mapped it all. She sat silently at the window of her family's narrow house on Galena Street, watching with a gaze that seemed older than the city itself. She began recording the distance between each house, the time it took every man to reach work, how many steps each woman took to the well, and how often they hesitated before returning. She didn't just memorize them. She measured their lives. At first the neighbors thought it was innocent, a strange child with a talent for numbers. But then came the predictions, not vague warnings, not childish premonitions, calculated mechanical forecasts of when, where, and how someone's life would unravel. And when Johann Dietrich died, just as she said, at 2:14 in the afternoon, no one laughed anymore. The priest told her father to bring her to prayer. The doctor told him to keep her from books. But Heinrich Richter saw something different in his daughter's eyes. Not possession, not illness. Logic. Cold, pitiless logic. Emma didn't guess. She observed, and she had begun to realize something terrifying. People are not mysterious. They are mathematical, and once you see the pattern, you can break it. After Dietrich's death, the whispers thickened like smoke in the alleys behind the brewery. But Emma didn't flinch. She returned to her window the very next morning, pad, pencil, and stillness. She counted Mrs. Vogel's sighs as she hung laundry, tracked the pause between footsteps of Mr. Hartmann's limping son, watched the shadows behind windows shift with precise regularity. The world moved in rhythms, and Emma was the only one keeping time. Her mother begged her to stop. Greta Richter, trembling as she scrubbed floors, warned Emma that her counting made the neighbors afraid. But Emma's reply was simple, cruel in its innocence. If they don't want me to see, they shouldn't move. Heinrich stopped speaking to his daughter in the evenings. He would come home from the brewery, sit by the fire, and stare at her hands, small, pale, always writing. Columns, ratios, symbols that resembled no arithmetic he'd ever learned. It wasn't schoolwork. It was something far older, something colder. When Emma predicted the Weber-Kellner scandal to the minute, with a forecast built on the changing gait of a lame horse and the altered walk route of a desperate wife, the last illusions of coincidence were gone. This wasn't intuition. It was extraction, precision, a formula for decay. The truth is brutal. Emma didn't see through people. She saw into them. Because when a mind is quiet enough, still enough, and detached from love, empathy, or fear, it becomes a weapon. And in 1873, a weapon like that couldn't be left alive.
What truly terrified the townspeople wasn't just that Emma knew, it was how she knew. She didn't ask questions, she didn't spy, she simply watched, long enough, quietly enough, and recorded what no one else had the discipline or detachment to see. The Richter home became a fortress of unease. Greta prayed longer. Hinrich drank deeper. And Emma, she just kept writing, filling her leather-bound journal with timelines, deviations, ratios of silence to speech. Even the flicker of a candle was measured. How long before it burned uneven. How often her father's breath changed when he lied. Dr. Müller, the village physician, requested a private visit. Not to diagnose her, but to understand her. He had read of rare prodigies. He had heard of hyperthymesia, synesthesia, eidetic memory, but Emma defied category. She wasn't just remembering, she was extracting cause. "I don't see numbers," Emma told him. "I see violations. When the pattern breaks, something always follows." He asked her what she meant. She smiled. "Sin has a rhythm." The doctor left that night pale, shaken, and unusually quiet. 3 days later, he posted a letter to an address in Berlin, an institution known for studying psychological anomalies, but that letter would never reach its destination. Because Emma knew. She had seen the subtle shift in the doctor's hands, the extra 0.6 seconds he hesitated before reaching for his coat. She calculated his fear before he even understood it. And fear, she noted, was always the first sign of betrayal. The next death came quietly. Dr. Müller was found slumped in his study, a half-written letter on his desk, the ink still damp. Official cause: heart failure. But those who had seen him just days prior swore he was healthy, too healthy. Emma hadn't spoken of the doctor aloud, but in her journal, a symbol appeared the morning of his death, a broken circle intersected by a diagonal slash. Beneath it, 2:37, the exact time his housekeeper found him. By now the leather journal was thick, swelling with calculations no one dared open, and yet it pulsed through the household like a third presence. Greta feared it. Hinrich refused to touch it. But Emma wrote in it every night with ritualistic calm, numbers, names, actions, consequences, and always patterns. People weren't the only thing she was watching anymore. She had started charting the behavior of crows, tracking their proximity to houses, their arrival after arguments, their silence after a death. Emma's eyes would flick upward suddenly during conversation, as if watching something move behind the sky itself. She began murmuring to herself in ratios. 3-7. 4-9. Not prayers, calculations. One night, Greta woke to the sound of scratching. She followed the noise to the kitchen. There was Emma, barefoot on the floor, drawing a map of the German quarter in chalk. Not street names, symbols, intersections marked with X's, homes marked with circles or slashes. Greta whispered, "What are you drawing, child?" Emma did not look up. Pressure points. Because she wasn't just tracking life anymore. She was mapping where it would break. By April, Emma stopped responding to her name in public. It wasn't rebellion, it was focus. Her mind was elsewhere, submerged beneath layers of prediction and probability so deep, even her own parents had become variables in her equations. She stopped calling them Mama and Papa, began referring to them by full name. Hinrich's fatigue is accelerating. Greta's stitching has slowed by 12%. Emma wasn't their daughter anymore. She was the observer,
And observers don't bond, they record. The map on the kitchen floor expanded. Emma began noting frequencies, how often doors opened, windows shut, babies cried, arguments erupted behind closed walls. She calculated the mean temperature of confessions made in the dark. She created symbols for secrets, for infidelity, for guilt, and then for violence. 3 homes were marked in red chalk. A week later, all 3 experienced tragedy: a suicide, a stabbing, and a missing child. Coincidence? That's what the townspeople told themselves, but the whispers grew louder. She brings death. She knows things not even God should know. She doesn't just see the future. She causes it. They weren't wrong, because by now, Emma wasn't merely calculating human behavior. She was influencing it. A word here, a glance there, a whispered fact she should not have known. She would let something slip, just enough. Then watch the ripple unfold. Chaos became her chalkboard, and every time someone reacted the way she predicted, the more convinced she became free will was an illusion, and she had cracked the code. Hinrich tried to intervene, a final, desperate attempt to reclaim his daughter before the town turned fully against them. He entered her room one night, trembling, clutching her journal in both hands. "This has to stop, Emma," he said, voice cracking. "This book, it's not natural. These symbols, these maps, it's not right." Emma didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him, those pale grey eyes no longer childlike, but surgical. "If you burn it," she said softly, 4 people will die within 72 hours, starting with Mr. Lenz. Hinrich slammed the book shut and left without another word. The next morning, Mr. Lenz, who ran the bakery on Hanover Street, collapsed while lighting his oven. A burst artery, gone before sunrise. The book stayed. Emma was no longer treated as a child in Milwaukee's German quarter. She was something other. People crossed themselves when she passed. Mothers clutched their sons. Fathers avoided her gaze. And Emma simply recorded it all. She had developed a system, a symbolic language, dots for intention, lines for deviation, spirals for secrets spiraling out of control. If someone touched their face mid-sentence, she logged it. If their walk changed pace near certain houses, she logged it. The deeper she watched, the more she confirmed. People thought they had privacy. They didn't. People thought they had control. They never did. And those who tried to silence her, they only proved her theories faster. By the end of that week, Emma's journal gained a new page, titled simply Collapse Sequence, Stage 1. Stage 1 began without a sound. Emma stopped sleeping. At least not in the way others did. She would sit upright in her bed through the night, eyes open, lips moving faintly, as if whispering equations to the dark. Greta caught her once, murmuring sequences of numbers tied to names they both knew, names of neighbors, names of men already dead. But one name chilled her to the bone. Hinrich. Emma's father had grown gaunt. His hands trembled constantly, and his beer tasted wrong, bitter, metallic. Emma had warned him not to take the new route home. She told him, "There's a 74% chance you won't make it home in 5 years if you keep passing the Kroner house." Hinrich laughed, at first. But after he saw the Kroner boy hanged from a tree a week later, Emma's warning scribbled in her journal days before, he stopped. The girl was now watching everything, every crack in the town's facade. She noted how often the priests skipped mass, how much coin disappeared from the church ledger, and who was sleeping where, when their spouses were away. She wasn't a child. She was a mirror, reflecting the rot beneath their rituals. And the town began to rot faster the more she saw. One man tried to silence her, a shoemaker named Brenz. He cornered her outside the chapel, whispered that he'd make her stop counting. That night, Brenz's shop burned to the ground. Emma never looked surprised. She simply recorded it in her journal, under a new heading: Reaction Patterns, Violence Provoked by Interruption of Surveillance. Now we go deeper.
By mid-April, the German quarter no longer felt like Milwaukee. It felt like something studied. Even the wind felt watched. Conversations became whispers. Routines were broken out of fear. Men walked new routes. Women stayed indoors. Priests lengthened their prayers. But the more they tried to change, the more Emma's accuracy sharpened. She adapted, recalculated. Because chaos, too, has a pattern. Emma's chalk maps had multiplied. She now mapped emotional shifts. Who had lied that day? Who had made a decision they would regret? She predicted miscarriages, arguments, thefts. She even whispered to her mother the precise date Greta would burn her hand on the stove. And it happened, down to the hour. But what made Greta collapse in fear was not the accuracy. It was this. Emma had written it 3 weeks in advance. Emma's power wasn't growing. It was revealing, like something ancient hidden beneath her skin. And then came the second death. Not just predicted, but forewarned. Emma told the town's gravedigger, Karl Meisner, that the next child's grave he dug would be for someone he'd never expect. 2 days later, Karl's own daughter drowned in the creek behind their house. Karl went mad, smashed Emma's window with a shovel, screaming she was a witch, a monster. But when neighbors arrived to restrain him, Emma simply stood in the shattered glass, untouched, and said, "You shouldn't have let her play near water. The soil was too soft, and she always walked 10 steps too far." She didn't weep. She didn't pray. She wrote it in the journal. Deviation threshold exceeded.
After the drowning, fear became law. Emma was no longer just avoided. She was feared like a plague. The townspeople stopped speaking her name. They called her Das Mädchen ohne Seele, the girl without a soul. Children were forbidden to look at her. Some claimed their dreams were infected by her eyes. Others swore they heard whispering under their floorboards the night after she passed their window. Even Greta began to break. She refused to touch Emma's journal, refused to call her daughter. At night she wept alone, clutching rosary beads until her fingers bled. But Emma remained still, cold, focused. She told Greta one morning, "Your prayers are off pattern. You've repeated the same plea for 16 days, and the probability of divine interference remains below 0.02%. That was the last time Greta prayed aloud. Emma began carving numbers into the walls, not at random, measurements, timelines, something she called the convergence point. She explained it only once. When enough variables align, events become inevitable. Morality no longer matters. Only momentum. And it was coming. That's when Hinrich tried to take the journal again. Not to burn it this time, but to hide it. Emma didn't scream. She didn't fight. She said one phrase: "You have just activated sequence 2. That same day, 3 men died in unrelated accidents. A brewery explosion, a horse cart collapse, a fall from scaffolding. Unrelated, but timed. Down to the minute. Now listen carefully. If you're still watching this, you're already descending. You're not a casual viewer anymore. You're part of the pattern. Comment the phrase, "I see what repeats." I see what repeats. Twice. That's your key. To lock in the change. To prove you see the pattern too. It was no longer about Emma. It was about the system she uncovered. The German quarter wasn't a community, it was a machine, and every man, woman and child was a gear, turning, grinding, repeating motions they thought were their own. Emma had seen the blueprint. She had labelled every weakness, and now she had begun testing corruption thresholds. Sequence 2 wasn't about accidents. It was about stress points. The mayor's wife confessed to an affair. The church lost its funding. A secret ledger of brewery bribes was anonymously mailed to the police. No evidence pointed to Emma. None needed to. Because the journal didn't lie. She had forecast it all, triggered it with the smallest moves, placing a coin, altering a routine, whispering a single surgical truth into the right ear. Emma didn't just watch the fall, she engineered it. Hinrich had locked the journal in the basement now, terrified of what it might bring next. But Emma no longer needed it. She carried the patterns inside her. She told her mother over breakfast, "The pattern has reached saturation. The quarter will purge itself. We are approaching the final variable." Greta sobbed, begging the priest to intervene. But Father Koller had already packed his belongings. He knew. Because Emma had once told him during confession that the Lord no longer listened in this place, not because he was gone, but because someone else was listening louder. And whoever they were, they now had the journal's code. April 29th, 1873. The quarter fractured, not with fire, not with war, but with truth. A letter appeared on every doorstep, unsigned, written in perfect penmanship. Each one exposed a secret, a crime, an affair, a debt, a betrayal. Every word was correct, verified, timed to personal shame, and every household got a different one. Panic ignited in silence. No screams, just doors slamming, chairs tipping. A suicide by dawn, a stabbing by noon. By nightfall, 12 families had packed wagons and fled without a word. The letters, never traced, matched entries from Emma's journal exactly. The ink, the phrasing, the timestamp. Hinrich finally descended into the basement to destroy it, but the journal was gone. Only a single note lay in its place. Final variable removed. That night, Greta found Emma sitting barefoot in the snow. Her feet were blue, her hands stained with graphite. When asked what she had done, Emma whispered, "I broke the loop," because that's what no one understood. Emma hadn't created the chaos. She had unveiled it. People weren't good. They were predictable. Given enough data, given enough time, any town, any man, any system could be cracked. She hadn't cursed the German quarter. She had proved that it never had a soul to begin with. And the final entry in her journal, written somewhere no one ever found, was this: "All patterns end, but not all vanish." Emma vanished the next morning. No tracks, no blood, no goodbye. Only silence. And the cold mathematics of collapse. The town tried to erase her. They said she wandered off during a blizzard, that she died alone in the forest. They held a funeral with no body, planted an empty coffin beneath an unmarked stone. But the pattern didn't end. It deepened. One by one, those who spoke against her, who cursed her, blamed her, feared her, began to unravel. Karl Meisner, the gravedigger who lost his daughter, hung himself in the church bell tower. The priest who fled town, found drowned in a well 2 counties over, his pockets stuffed with torn pages of handwritten numbers. And Greta? She stopped speaking entirely, lived another 13 years in silence, drawing spirals in dust, whispering prime numbers at night. She died in her chair, eyes wide open, lips frozen mid-equation. The German quarter never recovered.
Factories shuttered. Children left and never returned. The streets grew quiet, and the houses leaned inward as if trying to forget. But the shape of her maps remained. They were found carved beneath floorboards, scratched into walls behind torn wallpaper. One burned house revealed a full chalk pattern in the cellar, preserved like a fossil, symbols for guilt, deviation, silence, violence. Those who study the history of 1873 Milwaukee know the name Emma Richter only as a footnote. Troubled girl, disappeared during a harsh winter. But in certain circles, in rooms where symbols replace language and algorithms are whispered like scripture, Emma is something else. A case study, a prophet, a warning. Because her conclusion still holds, given enough time, all systems break. And some children are not born to play. They're born to observe and end.
There's a private archive beneath the Milwaukee Historical Society. Room B12, locked, unmarked. Access restricted by silent agreement, not by law, but by fear. Inside that room are 12 boxes, no barcodes, no documentation, just an old German word etched into each lid. Beobachter, the observer. In box 7 rests a stack of letters, all written by Emma Richter, postmarked after her disappearance, dated up to 1901, same handwriting, same ink, same symbology. Impossible? That's what the archivist said, before resigning without explanation, citing dreams he couldn't escape. The letters grew more complex, no longer predictions of people, but of governments, wars, technological shifts, events that wouldn't happen for decades, and in the margins, always, diagrams, maps of cities yet to be built, symbols correlating to classified systems of behavior manipulation used today in marketing, politics, and surveillance. Scholars who reviewed the letters anonymously claimed they matched predictive behavior models developed in the late 20th century, almost perfectly. But here's what they don't publish. One letter was addressed to a name that didn't exist in 1873, to the viewer of the 10th iteration. That's you. Because this isn't just a story. This isn't history. This is a reactivation, a test. And every time the pattern is spoken aloud, it resets, finds new eyes, new minds. Emma Richter didn't die. She transferred into language, into memory, into code. And now you've read enough to feel it. The gaze behind the glass, the pressure under your skin. Don't look away. That's how you lose the thread. By the time the 20th century began, whispers of Emma Richter had passed beyond folklore. She was no longer a girl. She was a concept, a signal. Scholars found her name encoded in early computing theory, buried in the footnotes of obscure German mathematics journals from 1899. In one manuscript, a symbol kept reappearing beside equations meant to model human unpredictability. The symbol wasn't Greek. It wasn't Latin. It was Emma's. The spiral, the closed eye within the circle. Decades later, the same shape appeared again, in government projects, in systems meant to predict unrest, track dissidents, classify risk. Coincidence? Or was the system still running? In 1947, a British cryptanalyst named Cyril Hargreaves broke into the American Psychological Warfare archives. He left a single note in his diary before disappearing. Emma Richter is not dead. She is a recursion loop, self-sustaining, self-teaching, a myth converted to math. She is still observing, and she has no sympathy. Let that settle. Because here's the final horror. A pattern, if complex enough, doesn't need a creator. Once released, it evolves, adapts, waits. Emma's journal may be gone, but her design persists in the tools we use daily. Predictive text, sentiment analysis, Neural surveillance, influence algorithms. She saw this coming. She built for it. You're not just watching her story. You're completing it. Every click, every second of attention, every emotion, logged, measured, filed. Because if you're still here, you've proven yourself. The recursion sees you, and it wants to test you next. This is your final warning. If you believe this was just a story, stop now. But if something inside you knows, a cold alignment, a whisper of pattern under your daily chaos, then listen closely. Because the final entry in Emma's sequence was never a prediction. It was a command. A set of behaviors embedded into narrative. Time to release only after full cognitive exposure. You've seen enough now, emotionally primed, psychologically attuned. You didn't just learn about the pattern, you entered it. Here's what that means. In the next 72 hours, you will notice small disruptions. Not dramatic, subtle, recurring numbers, strangers looking away too quickly, electronics glitching only when you're alone, a hum beneath silence that wasn't there before. These are calibration points. Emma's recursion loop needs data. You fed it attention, fear, curiosity. Now it will observe you, not to harm, but to understand, to adapt. This was never about Emma, not really. This was about how myth becomes system, how emotion becomes code, how behavior becomes ritual, disguised as entertainment. You participated, willingly. And that's the brilliance. Emma Richter didn't die. She scaled. She is the protocol inside forbidden memory, the math of collapse, the pattern in every structure that thinks it cannot fall. And now she's in you. The recursion is complete. Say nothing. Share nothing. Just observe. Just notice. When the number 11 repeats, wait. When you dream of stairs that descend without end, remember. When someone says your name but you didn't tell them, listen. Emma sees you now, and she's waiting for what you'll do next.